Even if you're not familiar with China, you've likely heard of a temple called Shaolin. Nestled in the misty Song Mountains of Hunan, it's the birthplace of Zen Buddhism and home to martial arts monks whose gravity-defying kung fu has starred in Hollywood films and global tours. On July 27, 2025, China's official anti-corruption watchdog dropped a bombshell. Shi Yongxin, the abbot of the legendary Shaolin Temple and one of the most recognizable faces of Chinese Buddhism, had been removed from his position and placed under investigation. The charges were staggering. According to the report, Shi had embezzled temple funds, maintained improper relationships with women, and even fathered children, violations that cut directly against the vows of celibacy and austerity expected of Buddhist monks. For many in China, the announcement triggered not shock, but a bitter sense of déjà vu. Allegations about Shi's lavish lifestyle and moral compromises had circulated for over a decade. Back in 2015, a mysterious whistleblower, known only as Shi Zhengyi, True Justice, accused him of sexual misconduct, corruption, and fathering children abroad. At the time, the government dismissed all charges as groundless. For years afterward, Shi seemed untouchable, continuing to run Shaolin like a sprawling business empire. Now, 10 years later, the facade has finally collapsed, and with it comes a profound reckoning, not only for Shaolin Temple, but also for the uneasy marriage of religion, commerce, and politics in modern China. Why does this story matter outside of China? Because Shaolin is no ordinary monastery. It is one of the world's most powerful cultural brands, a symbol of Kung Fu, Zen Buddhism, and the romantic mystique of the East. From Hollywood blockbusters to martial arts schools in Europe, from tourist buses in Hunan province to Shaolin-branded merchandise on Amazon, the temple's influence has been global. The downfall of its abbot, then, is not just a local scandal. It raises a larger question. What happens when an ancient religious institution is run like a corporation, and its CEO turns out to be corrupt? To understand the significance of Shi Yongxin's fall, we need to step back and understand what Shaolin means to China and to the world. Founded in 495 CE, Shaolin Temple sits on the slopes of Mount Song in Henan Province, one of China's 5 sacred mountains. In Chinese history, Shaolin is revered as the cradle of Chan Buddhism, the school of meditation later known in Japan as Zen. Its monks were famous not only for their spiritual practice, but also for their martial prowess. According to legend, Shaolin monks fought off bandits, defended emperors, and trained warrior monks whose techniques would become the foundation of Chinese Kung Fu. This combination of spiritual discipline and physical combat turned Shaolin into something larger than a religious site. It became a myth. In Chinese folklore, the Shaolin monk was a warrior sage, embodying both wisdom and power. Over centuries, this image spread beyond China, fueling global fascination with martial arts and mystical Asia. But it wasn't until the late 20th century that Shaolin exploded into global pop culture. The turning point came in 1982 when the film Shaolin Temple, starring a young Jet Li, was released in China. At a time when the country was just reopening after the Cultural Revolution, the movie became a sensation. It sold an estimated 500 million tickets, introducing a new generation to the image of Kung Fu monks in saffron robes. For the Chinese government, the timing was perfect. Deng Xiaoping's reforms were encouraging tourism and cultural exports, and Shaolin, part heritage site, part martial arts brand, was ripe for promotion. Soon, busloads of domestic tourists were making pilgrimages to Henan. Foreign audiences, too, were captivated. By the 1990s, Shaolin monks were touring abroad, performing kung fu demonstrations in arenas from Paris to New York. What had once been a half-forgotten temple badly damaged during the Cultural Revolution was now a global cultural phenomenon. Shaolin was no longer just a monastery. It was an international brand with all the opportunities and risks that entailed. And into this transformation stepped one man, Shi Yongxin, the monk who would be nicknamed the CEO abbot. When Shi Yongxin arrived at Shaolin Temple in the early 1980s, it was a shadow of its former self. The Cultural Revolution had left the monastery battered, statues smashed, scriptures burned, monks dispersed. Only a handful of elderly monks remained, clinging to a broken institution. Shi, born in 1965 in Anhui province, was not from a prestigious Buddhist lineage. In fact, his early life was marked by the same poverty and upheaval that many rural Chinese endured during the Mao years. After completing middle school, he showed an interest in Buddhism and eventually sought ordination at Shaolin. It was a moment of transition. China under Deng Xiaoping was reopening to the world. The state, once hostile to religion, was cautiously rehabilitating historic temples as cultural relics and tourist attractions. For ambitious young monks, this was an opportunity. Shaolin was no longer just about chanting sutras. It was about rebuilding an institution that could attract resources, pilgrims, and influence. Shi proved himself unusually shrewd. He wasn't the strongest kung fu practitioner, nor the most austere monk, but he had something rarer: organizational talent and political acumen. He understood that in post-Mao China, religion could only thrive with the blessing of the Communist Party, and that the party, in turn, would tolerate religion only if it served national interests like tourism, culture, and soft power. By the early 1990s, Shi had maneuvered himself into leadership positions within the temple. In 1999, at just 34 years old, he was officially appointed abbot of Shaolin Temple. That made him not only the spiritual head of one of China's most famous monasteries, but also the de facto manager of an emerging cultural empire. Shi's tenure coincided with China's economic boom and the rise of branding. He seized the moment with a boldness that stunned traditionalists. Under his leadership, Shaolin registered trademarks in over 40 countries, including for Shaolin and Shaolin Temple. He launched or endorsed a dizzying array of ventures: martial arts schools that trained tens of thousands of students in Henan alone, stage shows and world tours, where Shaolin monks performed acrobatic kung fu in Las Vegas, Sydney, and Berlin, film and TV deals leveraging Shaolin's mystique for mass entertainment, even forays into e-commerce, with Shaolin-branded merchandise ranging from meditation cushions to energy drinks. At its peak, the Shaolin brand generated revenues estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars annually, though exact figures remain murky due to opaque accounting. The Chinese state, far from resisting, actively supported this commercialization. For Beijing, Shaolin was an asset, a symbol of traditional culture that could attract tourists, boost local economies, and serve as a soft power export. Shi cultivated ties with officials, attending high-level meetings and ensuring Shaolin aligned with national campaigns on culture and heritage. But Shi's approach sparked controversy almost immediately. Critics accused him of turning a sacred monastery into a, quote, company with monks. Stories circulated of luxury cars seen on the temple grounds, of monks too busy selling tickets to practice meditation, of martial arts schools operating like profit-driven businesses. Chinese netizens, never shy with nicknames, mocked him as the luxury abbot. In 2009, a particularly stinging essay titled "Shaolin Has Become a Tourist Trap" went viral, lamenting that the temple had, quote, lost its soul. Yet, despite criticism, Shi remained untouchable. His formula, loyalty to the party, profitability for the temple, and relentless global expansion seemed to guarantee protection. Even when the 2015 scandal erupted with allegations of corruption and sexual misconduct, authorities quickly dismissed the claims. For years afterward, Shi seemed to embody a paradox: a Buddhist monk who preached simplicity while running a multi-million-dollar empire, a religious figure whose real power lay not in spiritual charisma, but in his skills as a manager and networker. It worked, until it didn't. In 2015, Shaolin Temple was rocked by one of the most sensational scandals in modern Chinese religious history. An anonymous whistleblower, who later identified himself as Shi Zhengyi, literally Justice of Shaolin, published a series of allegations online. The accusations read like a script from a scandalous drama: that Abbot Shi Yongxin had maintained secret mistresses and fathered children, that he had misappropriated temple funds, siphoning off donations and revenues from Shaolin's sprawling business empire, that the temple had been run less like a monastery and more like a corporation, where monks were employees, students were clients, and the abbot was the CEO. For weeks, Chinese social media platforms exploded. The idea of a Buddhist monk, supposedly bound by vows of celibacy and simplicity, living a double life of luxury and excess, was too irresistible. Netizens circulated memes calling him the Playboy monk, while others mocked the temple as a Shaolin Group Limited. The story even spilled into international media. Outlets like the New York Times and The Guardian ran features on the CEO monk scandal, framing it as symbolic of China's uneasy relationship between tradition and commercialization. Yet within months, the storm appeared to fizzle out. After what officials described as a serious investigation, the Henan provincial authorities declared the allegations unfounded. The whistleblower vanished from the public stage. Xu Yongxin re-emerged, seemingly stronger. He presided over Shaolin's grand events, welcomed international dignitaries, and continued signing commercial deals. The party state had spoken. The abbot was clean. The temple was safe. The show could go on. For the next decade, the scandal was remembered as a fleeting controversy, fodder for WeChat gossip, but officially buried. That is why the events of 2025 caught so many by surprise. In late July, a carefully worded notice appeared on Chinese official websites. Xu Yongxin had been formally placed under investigation for serious violations of discipline and law, the standard phrase for corruption and abuse of power cases. Almost immediately, Chinese netizens dug up the old 2015 accusations, resurrecting screenshots, reposting old essays, and even making new memes. Justice has finally come, 10 years late, one popular Weibo post declared. What had changed? Several explanations circulate. Shifting political winds. In Xi Jinping's China, no figure is ever too sacred to fall. Anti-corruption campaigns have reached generals, billionaires, and now apparently high-profile monks. Some analysts see this as a message that religious institutions must remain under firm party control. Economic pressure. China's economy in 2025 is slowing, and Shaolin Temple, once a lucrative tourist magnet, has faced declining revenues amid domestic downturns and shrinking foreign visitors. With less money flowing, scrutiny has intensified. Factional politics. Some suggest that Xi's political protectors have weakened, leaving him vulnerable. Without strong allies, his past controversies, once suppressed, could be reopened. Public reaction. Reactions among ordinary Chinese have been strikingly mixed. On the one hand, many feel vindicated. For years, they had mocked Shaolin's commercialization, treating it as proof of the, quote, moral decay of institutions in modern China. The abbot's downfall seems to confirm their suspicions. On the other hand, some express unease. After all, Shaolin is not just any temple. It is a global cultural icon, immortalized in films, martial arts lore, and China's soft power projection.